Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to be looking at the Motorola Moto G8 Power. Now you might be wondering why I'm looking at this phone. It's been out around 18 months and it has been replaced by the G9 Power, but I've been using the G8 Power for a few days now and I still think it has a place in 2021 as a budget phone, especially as it has some specs that are better than the G9 Power and also my Moto G30, which came out almost a year later. So let's see how it stacks up. So the Motorola G8 Power was released in April 2020, which is only 8 months before the G9 Power. So it's getting on a bit, but shares similar specs to the newer model. As for the specs, up front we have a 6.4-inch Full HD display, which is a sharper display than the 720p display found on the G9 Power. This is a standard 60Hz display, but to be honest, at this price point, it's not really an issue. It's a nice vibrant display with good viewing angles, although not the brightest when you're outside on a sunny day. But again, you have to remember the price of this phone now, which I paid £137 for this, so it's really cheap. Some of the viewers have commented on the uneven backlight around the punch hole cutout in the corner. I didn't, and to be honest, I'd be surprised if most people would, so I wouldn't let that worry you if you have seen those reports. So up the top left hand corner, you have your 16 megapixel f2.0 selfie camera, which can capture 1080p video at 30 frames per second. This camera is pretty respectable, capturing good photos with plenty of detail and true to life colour. Switching to portrait mode, and the camera does sometimes struggle separating the subject from the background, but this is common on budget selfie cameras, especially only being a single camera relying on software to calculate depth. But overall, it's decent and most people won't be disappointed with the results. On the bottom of the phone, you'll find your speaker grill, USB-C port and microphone, while on the top of the phone, you'll find a headphone jack and another microphone. This phone also has dual speakers with another speaker built into the earpiece, which is really nice to have at this price. They're good quality, but I wouldn't turn the volume up too high as they do start to sound a bit tinny the louder they get. And on the right side of the phone, you have your power button and your volume rocker. And on the left is the SIM tray with micro SD card support. If we flip the phone over, we have a plastic back with this sort of stripy effect. I don't know how well you can see that on the camera. That becomes more noticeable depending on how the light hits it, and it's definitely very noticeable outside on a bright day. As with most plastic phones, and as you can definitely see, it is one hell of a fingerprint magnet. I mean, my hands are quite sweaty, so that probably doesn't help. So I have what Motorola call Capri Blue, but the phone is also available in Smoke Black. But to be honest, colours don't bother me, as I always have a case on my phone anyway. At the moment, I'm just using this sort of cheap £7 case that I got off Amazon, which is doing an absolutely fine job. The Moto G8 Power's frame is made of 6000 series aluminium rather than plastic, which again is nice at this price. Inside the Moto G8 Power is a big 5000 milliamp battery, which is where the phone gets its name from. Although this is kind of redundant now, as most budget phones have at least this capacity, with the G9 Power having an even larger 6000 milliamp cell. Although battery life on this was great, I frequently finished my workday with between 60 and 70%, although this wasn't with a huge amount of screen on time. But either way, for most people, this will easily last all day and then some. So what am I on now? I'm on 65% at 5:15 in the evening. So again, this has lasted me pretty well. But if you do run low, the G8 Power supports up to 18 watt fast charging, which again, although it's not the fastest, it will charge from 0 to around 30% in half an hour. So it's not too bad. Also on the back is the fingerprint sensor, which I found to work every time, but most of the capacitive ones do anyway. I think once or twice it didn't read my print, but I think that was more down to the positioning of my finger rather than the actual hardware. And you can see it's not working now because my fingers are very sweaty. Hang on a minute, let's try and wipe that off. There we go. So yeah, if you've got sweaty fingers, it's not going to work the fastest, but there we go, it's working now, no problem. So as for the internals, the G8 Power runs a mid-range Snapdragon 665 processor, which is definitely getting on a bit. I think it's a couple of years old, and there are of course better processors on budget smartphones these days. But it's still more than capable of running all your daily activities, navigating through the interface, multitasking, etc. But it will also handle a bit of gaming as long as you keep the detail levels down. See, my hands are so sweaty, it's really hot, but normally the fingerprint sensor is really good. This is backed up by 4 GB of RAM which is about right for this price, although there are other budget smartphones on the market with 6GB. My Realme 7 and my Xiaomi Mi 10T Lite, for example, both have 6GB of RAM, but they do cost a little bit more. There's also 64GB of expandable storage, and this is the only storage option available, but again, with micro SD card support, it's not the end of the world. My experience using this as my daily driver, as the YouTube cliche goes, I've had no issues. It's a nice, smooth experience. Occasionally apps take a second or two longer to open, but other than that, it's perfectly fine. So even now, it's still a very capable phone. Software, we're running the new Android 11, which it just updated to yesterday, and this is coupled with a near stock Android experience, which Motorola is known for offering, and I'm a very big fan. So no bloatware, no pointless app repeats and games, just a bog standard Pixel-like experience. And finally, let's talk about the Motorola G8 Power's camera setup. This is an area that I'm personally a big fan of on this phone. So for the primary camera, you get a 16 megapixel sensor with an f1.7 aperture. This also supports video recording up to 4K at 30 frames per second. There's also an 8 megapixel f2.2 ultra-wide camera with a 118 degree field of view. This is backed up by a 2 megapixel macro camera, which everybody hates. I hate them, but there we go. But, and this is a very big but, whereas most budget quad camera setups have a fourth depth camera, this is swapped out for an 8 megapixel f2.2 telephoto lens with a 2x optical zoom. So of course this makes the G8 Power a very versatile camera and a better pick than a lot of other budget phones that have those other two lenses. Now of course the ultra wide and the telephoto cameras are not the highest resolution, but I would still take having, excuse my French, one shit lens rather than two. Photo quality from all these cameras to be expected aren't anything spectacular, but they're perfectly usable in good light. And of course the quality drops as the light reduces, and the lack of dark mode does make nighttime shooting more tricky. But I do find that all these cameras perform better than my Motorola G30, which is a newer smartphone and uses a 64 megapixel pixel binning technology camera, and this is just a bog standard 16 megapixel, no pixel binning or anything like that, and I do find that this performs better in most cases than the G30, and especially that selfie camera, which I find isn't great at all on the G30. You know, if I'm taking the odd selfie when the light's low, the G8 Power is a much better selfie camera. One thing to note though, when you switch to portrait mode on the main camera, the phone switches to using the telephoto camera instead of using the main camera. So if you're taking portrait shots of someone, you'll have to step back a bit because it does now use that telephoto camera. So that's my review of the Motorola G8 Power in 2021. While it does compromise on some hardware, namely the processor, it still has a lot going for it, including a nice sharp display, really good battery life, decent performance and a respectable camera. I'd recommend it today, also over the G30 and the G10, although I haven't actually used the G10, but I would imagine it's very similar to the G30, and it's a few quid less. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ding the bell icon so you know when I post a new video. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.